Good afternoon, producer Susan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jersey Joe. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Is it fall in Pennsylvania? You have
Oh,
your heat,
finally.
did your furnace start yet?
Oh no, but all of the windows in the house are open. I'm
Uh,
enjoying this weather. My
did
hair is enjoying this weather.
did Penn State have a home game this past weekend?
No, we played at Illinois and
And
we
how they
won.
and how they do?
We did very well, and we have a big game coming up this weekend against Iowa.
When you say very well, does that mean they beat Illinois?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, good. So they're what, 0-2, 0-3?
0-3.
Very good. And Iowa's the big game this weekend.
Iowa's the big game this weekend.
Is that home or away?
That is a home, fortunately.
Oh, well, good. All right. By the way, what are tickets for a game like that going for?
About $400 a piece.
Ooh. Now, do they set those prices at the beginning of the year, or is that just kind of the current market price?
That's just the current market value right now.
So are all seats, like when you buy your season tickets, are all games the same price to start?
No, they do what's called progressive pricing.
Uh-huh.
So the big games like Iowa and Michigan are going to be your progressively priced games, and then your um not big games. I don't want to
Well,
defame any
like
schools.
some college in New Jersey. That's
Like
not too far from
like
where I
like that college in New Jersey.
not too far from where I
Um
live, huh? $20 a
yeah,
seat.
yeah.
All right. All right. You want to hear what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, what's on the agenda?
All right. Well, first of all, for those listening, today's September 19th. The show is The Situation with Jerzee Joe. It's things you may not have heard about on TV or things you may have heard about, but maybe some different perspective. We're going to start off with our quote of the week is by Anonymous, but it's the difference between conformity and morality. We'll talk about the UAW strike, and we're going to tell you who the biggest beneficiaries of the strike will be. Hint, and it will not be the UAW members, even if they get everything they're demanding. Came across something the other day. I was watching a news clip. The Oktoberfest celebrations have already started in Germany, and I looked at some of the people at these Oktoberfest, and they looked incredibly young. So I started to do some research on how old you have to be to drink in Germany,
Is it
and
16?
it's even younger than that. So
Oh,
we're going to talk about the drinking age in Germany versus the U.S. and the traffic fatality rate in Germany versus the US. And you would think with people drinking at age 16, their traffic fatality rate would be way higher, right?
I feel like they're probably more responsible than Americans.
Well, I think you're going to be right. It's stunning the difference. All right. And our stupidest thing all I've heard all week, I'll tell you about which school district suspended sponsorship of their sports teams by a local family-owned business that has been sponsoring their sports teams for over a decade, and why the school board made that decision. Uh, we'll tell you about a transgender woman. I don't know if transgender woman, but anyway, she was born a female, and apparently she at some point when she was a teenager decided she didn't want to be female. So she underwent some surgery. She is now suing the doctors who removed her breast at her request when she was a teenager. And we talk about the ramifications that could result from that case if she wins her suit. It could be it could be landmark if she wins that lawsuit against the doctors who removed her breast at her request. Um, we'll discuss how low high school academic standards have fallen, and you and I have talked in the interim about the 16 books your child or
Oh yeah.
grandchildren
Yeah.
should read before they graduate from high school. And they should read these books even if they aren't assigned reading, because chances are they won't be. We'll tell you some things to consider if you're deciding whether or not to get the new COVID inoculation. And by the way, I'm not going to call it a vaccine because it is not a vaccine. Um, and our taxpayer relief shot segment comes to us from West Melbourne, Florida, where two armed home invaders decide to invade the wrong house at 3 o'clock in the morning. You can probably guess what happened when I say they picked the wrong house. Can you guess what happened?
I think I have a pretty good idea.
All right. Here we go. This is by Anonymous. And let me get your reaction. You haven't heard this before. Conformity is doing what everybody else is doing, regardless of whether or not it is moral. Morality is doing what is right, regardless of what everybody else is doing. Any thoughts, or can you think of any situations and think back to Nazi Germany?
Yeah, no, that's an accurate statement.
Right. Because most people in Germany were doing what everybody else was doing, but it certainly wasn't moral.
Mhm.
And so sometimes you get people that stand up and say, that's not right. I'm not going to do that. I don't agree with that.
Mhm.
That's the difference between conformity and morality.
And the
Anything,
Diary of Anne Frank is on our list, I think, of books, and
the
that's one
Diary of Anne
that
Frank is absolutely on
revolves
our,
around the Nazi war and people who did the right thing.
right. And the family that hid Anne Frank was not conforming because everybody else was turning in the Jews. The family that hid Anne Frank did the right thing, did the moral thing, but not what was, but they didn't conform to what everybody else was doing. All right. I assume you've heard that the UAW is on strike. You've heard that,
I
right?
did. Yep. Yep.
All right. Well, if the UAW gets the majority of what they're asking for in their contract demands, do you know who the real winners are going to be?
The union workers.
Nope. The real winners, if the UAW gets everything or even the majority of what they're asking for, the real winners are going to be companies like Honda, Toyota, Nissan, Kia, Hyundai,
Mhm.
Mazda, Subaru, and Tesla, all of whom have
Those are
non-union
non-union. Yeah, those are non-union.
non-union, and by the way, collectively, those companies I just rattled off have 20 auto plants in the United States. Everyone is non-union. Do you know what percentage of the US manufactured cars they produce?
I'm going to say like 50% of the cars.
48%. And here's
Oh,
the other stunning thing. 20 years ago, that number was less than 10%. So they've gone from like 7.5% to 48% in 20 years. It's if you look at the trajectory, they're just blowing past the union plants. And here's the other thing. In addition to those plants, now in the United States, all the engines and transmissions, if you drive you drive what kind of car you drive?
I drive a Jeep.
All right. Well, so Jeep, Dodge,
Mhm.
the UAW makes the engines and transmissions that go into your Jeep. And same thing with the Chevys and Fords. You know who makes the engines that goes into Toyotas, Nissan, Hondas, Mazdas, Kias? You know who makes those engines and transmissions?
Are they made overseas or?
They're made overseas.
Yeah,
So, some
in
as
non-union plants.
right, and well, I drive a Kia Telluride, very highly rated, in fact, top rated car. The Kia plant in Nissan, which is a marvel of automation, it's a massive state-of-the-art factory. They assemble cars there and they do the sheet metal and they do the axles and the tires, but they install engines and transmissions that are built in South Korea by South Korean workers. Do you think the South Korean worker gets a wage and benefit package remotely close to what the UAW workers get?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, I think many of the people who are Asian, regardless of the country, they are probably the hardest working people they don't have
Right.
the same labor laws that we have in America.
Right. And they're not getting, they don't have the mandatory, government, they don't have the Obamacare mandated health care, they don't get the pension plans. So in addition to the workers that are actually working in those 20 US plants, you've got thousands more workers in Japan and Korea and even places like Vietnam where they're building these high dollar value components and they're putting them in containers and shipping them over. So it's not just, and as an example, for instance, GM has a plant that builds nothing but motors. It's a motor factory. They don't build cars, they build motors. Well, in the case of all these other companies, they're building those motors and transmissions at other plants overseas. So in addition to the 20 plants I rattled off, you can add to that another 8 or 9 plants that are building engines and transmissions overseas. So the actual apples and apples number is probably closer to 30. So again, if the union gets most of what they're demanding, those foreign manufacturers, and Tesla's not foreign, but those foreign manufacturers plus Tesla are going to be the real winners because it'll be even tougher for the U.S. product to compete with those vehicles. And by the way, the head of the UAW is an avowed socialist. He was they did it. He was on CBS Face the Nation Sunday morning, did an 8-minute interview, and I urge you to to look at that 8-minute interview and face him. The guy is an avowed, in-your-face socialist. He is out to punish the executives and the shareholders of those companies. He really doesn't, in my opinion, doesn't really give a damn about the workers. He kept using terms like fair share and greedy CEOs and slave labor. He is just angry, and he wants to punish those executives and the shareholders of those companies. And I think he's going to put his hatred and his socialist standards ahead of what's best for his employees. In fact, I actually did, let me see if I can find it. Hang on a second here. Let me see if I can find what I actually wrote down some of the things he said.
Well, while you're
Let me see
looking
if
for
can
that, I can say that I
that.
finally, for a change, I have been without CBS
Dead air
July
here.
1st.
I'm sorry?
I've been without CBS, at least in my market. I've been without CBS since July 1st because Nexstar and DirecTV were fighting with each other, and it finally came back on this Sunday.
Okay. All right. I actually took notes, and this is all in 8-minute interviews. Here's the phrases he used. He used the term fair share 3 times in 8 minutes. He used decades of massive profits. He used the terms billionaire class and working class, which is clearly, social divide. Paying poverty wages. He said that 2 times. Zero retirement security, which is laughable given how generous the current UAW pension plan is. I don't know how he gets away saying our workers have zero retirement security. And when you look at the UAW pension plan, that's laughable. Then he had to throw in global warming. Then he had to throw in enriching shareholders and CEOs has to stop. My question is why? That's the whole reason you form a business, make a corporation, is to enrich the people who invest in your company. Greedy CEOs. He talked about the CEOs pay us up 40% in 4 years. And what he failed to mention is that 90% of that increase is in the value of the stock options. It's not like that's being cash paid to the amount of company profits. The company says, all right, we're going to give you stock options. If they're worth more money, great. So it's not like this is money coming out of the company treasury going to the CEOs. I think Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, she made $29 million, but of that $29 million, only 4.5 was cash. Everything else was the value of her stock options, which was not company cash. Then he said CEOs are already millionaires and have, quote, second home in Acapulco. I mean, talk about class warfare. This guy is absolutely just on a rampage, and he makes no bones about it. He is a socialist, and he's just out to punish them. Anyway, there's going to be one other big winner. You know who the other big winner besides those non-union car companies are?
Who?
The companies that make assembly line robots. And you know why they're going to be big winners?
Because they're going to be replacing those people.
Right. Now, one robot can do the work of 5 assembly line workers. Now, why aren't there more robots? Well, robots are expensive. Even a cheap one costs $150,000 to purchase, install, program, and calibrate. $150,000. But one robot can do the work of 5 assembly line workers, never needs a coffee break, never takes a bathroom break, doesn't need a lunch break, never gets sick, doesn't take vacation. So there comes a point when your labor costs get so...
retirement plan.
No retirement plan. So there comes a point where spending that money to install assembly line robots, and they've already done that. I think the U.S. auto industry is already employing more than 150,000 robots. And I think if the union gets, by the way, the union also wants a 32-hour work week in addition to a 41% pay increase. They also want a 32-hour work week. Well, there comes a tipping point where, screw it, we're just going to we're going to automate as many jobs as we can and just put, as many robots as we can, even though they're going to cost us at least 150,000. Some of the more...
When is 40 hours not a normal week?
I don't know, but again, the people are going to be the big losers. You heard the phrase, win the battle, lose the war.
Yeah. Well, meanwhile, all these people that are currently on strike that are not going to be getting a paycheck for their time that they're standing on the picket line, their families now have less disposable income to spend in the economy.
Well, actually, the union has a strike fund and the union is cutting them a check. So the
Okay.
union says they have enough money to sustain a 6-week strike. So they are getting a paycheck. Um, uh, and that's why I think this is going to be a drawn out strike. And by the way, which is going to create a car shortage. You know what happens when there's a car shortage?
Car prices are going to go up, and they were just about to come. They were just about
Right.
to become stable because of the pandemic, with shortages of
Supply chain,
chips.
right. I bought a car 2 years ago and I shopped around. The cheapest car I could find was $3,500 over MSRP.
Mhm.
Every single dealer was demanding and getting it.
Yeah.
I'd call up a
And
dealer
the
and
used
say,
car market was out of control too because
yeah,
of that.
dealers would say, yeah, I got 2 in this morning, but he said, but they won't be here by 5 o'clock. And they were
Mhm.
right. If you wanted a car, you had to call at 9 o'clock in the morning. They say, yeah, 2 came in last night, but they won't be here by tonight. And that was literally every place I called. And the cheapest, best deal I could find was $3,500 over sticker. So I think you're going to see that as well. Anyway, so that's the deal. The big winners are going to be Honda, Toyota, Nissan, Tesla, Kia, Hyundai, and the companies that make assembly line robots. All right, you want to move on to Germany, or you want to stick with the UAW for a bit?
Yeah, no, let's move on to Germany.
All right, so I'm watching this news report of Oktoberfest. I'm looking at these young kids drinking beers, and I'm going, how young are they? So here's what I found out. The drinking age for beer and wine in Germany is 16, and the drinking age to purchase and consume hard liquor like whiskey and vodka is only 18. And I'm
Mhm.
going, well, geez, you combine people drinking vodka at 18, and the roads, highways like the Autobahn don't have a speed limit, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
So I'm
that's
saying
the
no.
famous road in Germany.
I'm sorry. Yeah,
That's
right.
the Autobahn is famous.
No speed limit. If you want to do
Yeah.
110 miles an hour, you can do 110 miles an hour, or I think it's 150 kilometers, as we say. Anyway, so I'm thinking, okay, their traffic fatality rate must be off the charts. So I started looking at their traffic fatality rate. Well, their traffic fatality rate per 100,000 population is 3.7. You know what the U.S. traffic population fatality rate per 100,000 population is?
I think it's about twice that, isn't it?
4 times.
Yeah. Oh, 4 times. Wow.
12.9. It's 350%. And let's talk about now, not as many people own cars in Germany. So I said, okay, well, what's the traffic fatality rate per vehicle? Well, it's 6.4 in Germany. You know what it is in the United States per
Is it
vehicle?
double that? Twice that?
Triple, 16.1. 16.1. So, oh, and did I mention that if in Germany, you can also purchase and own a rifle, pistol, or shotgun in Germany once you reach age 18? If you can't buy a pistol in this country until you're 21, right?
Yep.
So here's my thought. So maybe the U.S. needs to rethink its double standard that on one hand, allows people to vote, join the military without your parents' permission, or to enter into legally binding contracts at age 18, but not to purchase alcohol or a gun until you're age of 21, because clearly age doesn't seem to be the determining factor. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I've always been troubled by the double standard. I think, hey, if you can vote and you can enter into a legally binding contract, then you ought to be able to drink and you ought to be able to buy a gun.
Mhm.
I never could understand the justification for this, for can't drink till you're 21 or can't buy a gun
Yeah.
till you're 21. And Germany, I think, is an excellent example of that. It is more the culture, I think. I've got a sister who I shared this with, and she talked about how strictly they enforce the laws over there. They have a lot of cameras, and
Mhm.
if you're caught, speeding, they're much stricter on enforcement. So I think it comes down to culture and enforcement, which clearly the U.S. doesn't have that culture, that
Yeah, so
sense of
many times do we
responsibility.
see people breaking the law and just getting a slap on the wrist.
Slap on the wrist, right? Like a couple of months ago, we did a taxpayer relief shot. The guy who shot the off-duty cop, I think, had been arrested. He was 38 years old, been arrested 21 times.
Yeah,
What is
that's
this guy
absurd.
doing on the street? 38 years old, arrested 21 times. Why is he on the street? So anyway, so that's just my rant on drinking age, and clearly it's not the age; it's the sense of responsibility and enforcement. And again, one more time, Germany, where you can drink beer at 16 and whiskey at 18, their traffic fatality rate is 3.7 per 100,000. The U.S., where you can't drink until you're 21, is 12.9 per 100,000.
And of
Something
course,
is,
it varies from country to country over in Europe, but that's almost, that's the European standard is.
yeah. I used to spend a lot of time in France, and 16-year-olds are in a restaurant.
Mhm.
The family orders a bottle of wine, and the 16-year-old gets a glass. The restaurant will give the 16-year-old a glass. It is legal and accepted in Europe for 16-year-olds to be able to drink beer and wine, and 18 if they want out vodka, they can have vodka.
Mhm.
Anyway, so you want to move on to school board banning a sponsor?
Yeah. Who they ban and why?
You ever heard of a company called Nosler?
I don't believe I have.
Well, you probably wouldn't. Nosler is a family-owned company based in Bend, Oregon, and they got their start making not the whole bullet, but just the lead bullet for people that reload their cartridges. And then a couple years ago, they got such a demand, they started making really high-end complete cartridges that included their bullet, with the brass cartridge and the primer and the powder. But these are very, very high-end bullets, very expensive, like 2 or 3 times what a normal bullet costs. And they're purchased exclusively by competition target shooters and big game hunters, like go to Africa. So this is not your typical, box of 9mm that the gangbangers use. These are high-end. They're like the Mercedes-Benz of bullets. Okay, so they're like a niche manufacturer. Anyway, Nosler, family-owned company based in Bend, Oregon. For more than a decade, they've been sponsoring the high school and junior high school sports teams. On the scoreboard, you've got, there's, you got Nosler under the scoreboard, and on the baseball fields, how they have the banners around the fence or
Yeah.
on the baseball
Yeah.
field. You'll see the Nosler, and it's a great thing. Well, 2 people, one teacher and one mother, complain that we think it's wrong that you allow a company that makes ammunition to be sponsoring our sports teams. Not the whole community, not 20 people, not 2 people. School board caved and told Nosler, we can no longer accept your sponsorship. They took their name off the scoreboard, and they took their banners off the baseball field. So I'm just shaking my head. Is that the stupidest thing you ever heard?
Yeah, it should be, more community businesses supporting community events like this. So this is what America, this is why America should be a great place, is that community, the sense of community.
Right.
And not, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the women who made this complaint did so because there was said that because there was a fatal shooting in downtown Bend. The shooter was a Mountain View student. And by the way, some of the team shirts had emblazoned with the company name Nosler. Anyway, now keep in mind that there is no evidence that any of the high-end ammunition manufactured by Nosler was used in that shooting incident, or for that matter, any other shooting fatality anywhere in the United States ever. But that detail apparently doesn't matter to the people looking for an excuse to be outraged. So in my opinion, that's the stupidest thing I've heard all week. How about you?
Yeah, it's a shame that a community would fold for the opinions of 2 people.
2 people suspend the sponsorship of a local, and it's not a big corporation, it's a family-owned business that employs, God knows how many people in Bend, Oregon. I've seen videos of their factory. So maybe 100 people, 100 local citizens work at the factory. So, it gives me agita. All right. So you want to move on to the woman who's suing doctors for removing her breasts and why this could be a landmark case?
Yeah.
All right. So a woman is suing the doctors who removed her breasts at her request. Now remember, at her request when she was 15 and was diagnosed with, quote, gender dysphoria. Now, why is this case extremely important, and what do you think the ramifications will be if she wins it?
I think it's going to have major ramifications, but it was always my understanding that any of these surgeries and procedures for trans people, that you need to undergo psychological counseling, and that you are supposed to live in the sex that you wish to become for 1 full year before having anything permanent done.
Well,
so my question is, why was mental health evaluation not done prior to this?
Well, apparently she had seen a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist was actually on her side. Well, I think you should do this. Okay. Now remember, this took place over a decade ago,
Mhm.
because she's 25 now. This happened when she was 15. And at that time, it was her psychiatrist who diagnosed her with gender dysphoria. Now, so I actually hope she wins the case, because, hey, if you're 18, 21, 25, and you decide you want to have your breast removed, your penis removed, God bless you, you're an adult. If that's what you want to do it. But when you're 15, I
Yeah.
don't think doctors should be performing body mutilation on people who haven't reached the age of consent. And I really hope she wins.
Agreed.
So,
We were just talking about the age, 18 years old. You're not done growing, you're not done developing. You should be 18 before permanent solutions
right.
are made.
And I really hope she wins, because if she does win her case, I believe it will have a chilling effect. And by the way, a 15-year-old can't legally enter into a contract or can't legally give consent, right?
Yeah, so I would assume in that particular case that the parents were supportive,
Right.
which I'm happy that the parents were supportive of their child's
Right.
decision. But again, under the age of 18, that's a permanent thing that can't be undone.
Right. Remember the doctor's creed: first, do no harm.
Yeah.
Right. So I really, really hope, I'm going to be watching this case and we'll give updates. I really hope she wins, because I think if she does win, hopefully no other doctors will perform body
Mhm.
modification on minors, because they think they think they should be a gender other than what they were born. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Anything you want to add on that?
No,
All
we're
right.
curious to see how it unfolds.
All right. So you and I and some of my other relatives, we had a back and forth
Mhm.
on books that every high school student should read before they graduate. And this all got started. I was talking to my granddaughter one day in the car, and I forget what came up, and I made a reference to some book, and she said, and she didn't know whether it was Moby Dick. I think I mentioned the white whale, Captain Ahab, and she said, well, who is Captain Ahab? What white whale? And I said, you never read Moby Dick? And then I started to rattle off some other books. She'd never read any of them, never been asked to read any of them. And then I talked to my grandson, and I said, did you ever read this book, that book? No. And here I'm stunned. And I know you and I have discussed this, and I'm saying, what has happened that high school kids aren't being assigned, reading these classic stories? And so you and I came up, I gave you my list, and I said, well, what if we just did four books per year, starting when you're a freshman in high
Yeah,
school?
and I have to say this was a tough assignment because four books was tough because I remember having to read at least 10 a year.
Right. But some are
And
really,
I
really.
also have to say I'm surprised at your grandchildren's response, because now I wouldn't be surprised. I know that your grandchildren went to also a reputable Catholic school. Had they
Mhm.
gone to public school, I wouldn't be surprised. The fact that they went to Catholic school shocks me that they're not more well-read.
Yeah, well, you and me both. And by the way, and I blame a lot of this. When I was growing up, I'm dating myself, but there was only one TV in the house and only got about 3 black and white channels. And typically in the evening, the parents were watching. They were watching something like the Milton Berle Show or Jack Benny, not kids shows. So you either did your homework or you read a book. And I just, I'm thinking back, like books like Tom Sawyer and the Huckleberry Finn. I read those not because they were assigned to me. I read them because I wanted to read them. So, and I really think, and by the way, and some of these books, like we talked about, like the Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka, the guy who wakes up as a cockroach. These are really skinny. These are quick. These are books you read in a night. These are not books that they take 3 days to read, right?
Well, and I think some of the books we talked about this briefly last week, some of the books like 1984 and Fahrenheit 451, and they're so the message in these books is so powerful to today's what's happening in the world today.
Yeah, really. In 1984, Animal Farm, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
So anyway, so here's my, we won't try to, we don't have enough time to categorize them, but there's more than 16 books here. But if you're a parent or a grandparent, ask your kid or your grandkids, have they read these books? And here's the list, and you'll be able to find these. If you want a list, just message me on the
Or we
the
can post the
website.
list on the website.
Post it, right. So here's the partial list. Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain, The Adventure of Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer, and Mark Twain. 1984, George Orwell. Animal Farm, George Orwell. To Kill a Mockingbird. The Catcher in the Rye. Macbeth. Hamlet. Romeo and Juliet. The Count of Monte Cristo. Beowulf. Catch-22. Fahrenheit 451. A Tale of Two Cities. The Grapes of Wrath. The Odyssey. The Iliad. Those are Greek tragedies. The Lord of the Flies. The Canterbury Tales. The Metamorphosis. Moby Dick. Raisin in the Sun. Frankenstein. The Diary of a Young Girl, which is the story of Anne Frank, Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, Dante's Inferno, The Great Gatsby, Wuthering Heights, Great Expectations, and The Color Purple. And there are more, but that's a reading list, I think, that every high school graduate should have read by the time they graduated.
But yeah, many of those books are very eye-opening into the societal issues we're facing today.
Couldn't agree more. And again, so people listening, if you've got kids, you have nieces, nephews, ask them what books they've read in school so far. And unfortunately, I'm afraid you're going to be greatly disappointed. All right, we're running out of time, so we're going to talk about the COVID booster, which is hitting the pharmacies this week. Things, and again, and it's not a vaccine in a classic sense of the word. It's an inoculation. So here's some things to consider. And this is by Dr. Kelly Victory, who's a female doctor, and she's an expert in the field of COVID. And here's what she said. Let's start with the fact that these new boosters, which are monovalent boosters, and people may recall that the previous COVID boosters were bivalent boosters. They were predicated on both the Wuhan strain and the Omicron. These new ones are based only on the XBB variant of Omicron. So start with the fact that the XBB variant of Omicron currently constitutes as little as 4% of all current cases of COVID. In other words, if you get COVID right now, there's a better than 96% chance that you've got a variant other than XBB, which is the only variant that the inoculation is good against. And in a couple of more weeks, it'll probably be entirely gone. So once again, they are selling a booster for a virus that is already minimal in terms of its impact on society and will probably be completely gone in another month or two. Then add on top of that these new boosters that somehow managed to get approved under the emergency use authorization, one has to wonder what emergency exactly is still ongoing and why are they an emergency use? Again, is there an emergency? Do we have people dropping dead from COVID?
Not that I've heard.
So why is there an emergency use authorization?
I mean, I have heard that cases are up.
Cases are up, but fatalities aren't, right? And by the way, these shots were tested on a total of 10 mice, not one single human being, 10 mice. Remember all the myocarditis, people dying from inflammation of the heart? Healthy young teenagers, getting myocarditis. These shots were not tested on a single human being. So she says it's just wrong on so many levels that it makes her head want to explode. And again, we talked last week about the importance of vitamin D.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you to get it or not get it. Personally, given the minimal benefit it has, the risks it has, and the fact that I'm comfortable with my vitamin D immuno system, I personally am not going to get it. How about yourself?
Probably not. And every time I have received, all the boosters thus far, and man, and I think it's because I have a healthy immune system. Boy, does it kicks my butt the day after. Yeah. I am just wiped out for 24 hours post shot.
Yeah. So I'm going to pass. Anyway, how much time we got?
You got less than 5 minutes.
All right, real quick, taxpayer relief shot. Here we go, and I'll let the sheriff of Santa Rosa County explain to you why we call them a taxpayer relief shot.
Somebody's breaking in your house, you're more than welcome to shoot them in Santa Rosa County. We prefer that you do, actually. Hopefully you'll save the taxpayers money.
And he's absolutely right. $75,000 a year to keep a thug in jail, and plus $250,000 to try him for his crimes. So this one comes to us from West Melbourne, Florida, and here we go.
And is dead, and another is in critical condition after police say that a home invasion ended in gunfire. This one happened early this morning at an apartment complex in West Melbourne. And as West 2's Michelle Meredith reports, police say that the two men shot were actually the attempted burglars. In this particular home invasion, the suspects didn't count for the people inside the apartment to be armed, but they were. So this story has an unusual ending, an ending that caught many in the neighborhood off guard.
Oh my God. Wow. According to police, it started Sunday about 3 a.m. at an apartment complex in West Melbourne.
6 police cars, something like that. And a big yellow tape that's way out there.
People called in to say they heard gunshots. When police got there, they learned they were dealing with a home invasion. 2 men forced their way into an apartment. According to police, one suspect had a gun, but so did the people inside the apartment. When it was all over, one home invader suspect was dead, the other in critical condition.
Yes, it's very scary. It makes me kind of wonder, where could we go to be safe?
After getting over the initial shock, folks we talked to say the people in the apartment really had no choice.
I'm a proud Second Amendment person myself. So, I mean, if you invade my home, I'm going to protect my space.
Homeowner had to do something. I mean, that's why it's self-defense, right? That's why you have a gun. And if you didn't have that gun, I'm sure you'd be in a lot more trouble.
At this point, no charges have been filed against the person who shot the home invaders. That decision will be up to the state attorney's office. In the meantime, police are working to find out motive and to find out if the two groups knew each other. In Brevard County, Michelle Meredith, West 2 News.
So what do you think of that one, producer?
That is a perfect example of when seconds count. The police are minutes away, that they needed to defend themselves because they literally had seconds to protect themselves.
3 o'clock in the morning, they break down your door and they've got a gun.
Mhm.
What are you gonna do? Oh, hang on, I need to dial 911 while you're pointing that gun at me.
And
No.
wait 3, 5, 7, 9 minutes for the police to show up, depending on where you are
Right.
located.
Classic taxpayer relief shot. That's an award winner. So again, one guy was DRT, the other guy's in the hospital in critical condition. Anyway, we're about out of time. So unless you've got something to add, I'm just gonna thank everybody for giving up 30 minutes of your time. Anything you want to add?
No, enjoy this fall-like weather. The equinox is coming up this weekend, I believe.
That's correct. And if anybody wants to see that list, producer Susan's producer Susan's gonna put on the website, or just email me at joe@jerzee-joe.com. Just remember to spell Jersey, Jerzee. And with that, I'll sign off and talk to you next week.
All right.
All right, talk to you next week, producer Susan. Bye-bye.